Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rollwise podcast, the show where we talk about games related to RPGs related to whatever. Where we talk about RPGs. I am apparently going to have
We
a
talk
fun
about
night talking.
games.
We talk about games and our experiences playing them. So we hope you enjoy as we journey through various games, our reflections on each of these games, what we learn, what we like, what we don't like, and all those kind of things. There we go. So um, today we're going to do a little bit of a talk, give a little bit of a debrief on our experience playing Eat the Reich. Now, I think this was probably one of the more well, it was very like focused game, I would say. Um, but just to properly credit it, anybody that hasn't heard of Eat the Reich, this is a game that's put out by uh, what is
Rowan
it?
Rook and
Grant
Deckard.
Howitt. He was
It's Grant Howitt and Rowan Rook and Deckard.
and art and graphic design was done by Will Kirby. And so, like, many people, if you look online and stuff like that, it seems like this game was fairly well received, just because the art style alone was really evocative, very interesting, very graphic too.
Killer
Um,
trailer. They had a killer trailer up on YouTube, which is I was
yeah.
sold the minute that I watched the trailer. I was like, "Oh, I'm getting that game," because the trailer
Yeah.
was
Well,
awesome.
I mean, it doesn't hit like a lot of the other games that you have. I mean, it basically it decided it wanted to kind of introduce one objective. It wanted to do it pretty well. And so if you like it, you're really going to like it. If you don't like it, probably not
Yeah,
going to look at it again.
it does one thing. It's not a campaign game. It's like a one shot with your friends
Mhm.
game. You could do multiple games of it by just changing up the story a little bit, but essentially it's one objective, and you're going to do that objective
Yeah.
every time you play the game.
So I think this is the objective. This is what I found is like Europe is in flames. You're a unit of crack vampire commandos with a single objective: drink all of Adolf Hitler's blood and fatally destabilize the Nazi war machine. So I think probably one thing I'd want to mention before we get too deep into this is that this is by all means anti-Nazi propaganda in terms of a game and everything
Oh,
like
for
that.
sure.
It pretty much says that Nazis are fascist. It says that is like a very clear statement they want to make about the game is that you are there to commit ultraviolence against Nazis. However, I don't really think we're going to talk about the policy of Nazisms or fascism as part of this. Like that's not really where we're going to go with this. We just want to talk about the game. However, if you have experiences playing the game and you want to share those down in the comments, we'd really like to hear your experiences playing through Eat the Reich. What did you like about it? If you've run the game too, that's also a really good perspective that we'd like to hear, because the game has I could see it going really well, or I could see there being some challenges that people could run into as they plot through it.
Mm-hmm.
But that out of the way, let's talk about killing Nazis and Eat the Reich. And
Uh,
there's you two
another thing
laughing
that's
at them.
like I said, another thing that's interesting about the game, and it's doing its one thing, is
Mhm.
like there's no character creation. It's like you pick these vampires. These are the vampires that you play in the game.
Mhm.
So the game is very focused on this is what the game does. This is what you're doing. That's what it does.
Mhm. Yeah, and they were pretty interesting characters. I think just to kind of illustrate, like what kind of characters and stuff like that they had. Do you guys want to share the characters that you chose from the selection of pre-generateds?
Sure. Do you want to go
Okay.
first, Jeff?
Yeah, I chose to play Astrid, former fighter pilot whose plane got shot down somewhere in northern Europe over the tundra, and woke up from the crash being gnawed on by something, and got these powers and could control animal spirits. It's kind of a gung ho, charge forward, badass kind of character.
Yeah, Astrid's like a predatory shaman type or
Okay,
medicine
sure, that's it. Yeah.
person type is kind of how she is with her spear and her machine gun. I played Cosgrave, the third best necromancer in London, who's kind of a arrogant magic-y character is how I played
Mhm.
him. He's a lot of fun with a sawed-off shotgun. which was pretty cool. He really excelled at like talking is one of the things he's supposed to be really good at, which we took up a strong stance of we don't talk to Nazis during our game. So
That's fair.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of
And
negotiating.
no,
and I got to play the ever lovable Flint, born in a cave, half bat, half human, all nightmare kind of character, which was a lot of fun. Because the as per Brent's recommendations, I watched Creature Commandos recently, and it was very easy to see similarities between what was the character's name? The
Weasel between
Weasel,
Flint and Weasel. Yeah.
Yeah, it was between that type of character, Weasel, and a Flint type character, where it's not even clear until the player decides whether he can talk or not.
Yeah. And the characters we didn't play, we played Chuck, who's like an American cowboy who's more of a zombie type, like he eats dead people, not necessarily blood. And he's described as kind of the jokester of the group, which I thought was weird. And then there's there's Nicole, who's like a French resistance fighter who got turned into a vampire. And then
there is Iriana
Iriana or something like that.
Yeah, Iriana, who's like the leader. She's kind of supposed to be the leader of the group.
Yep. And so, they recommended 3 to 6 players, so you can obviously take everybody into the mix and all that kind of stuff. And pretty much, as the game says. Now, I do want to say that, when they suggest who the game is for players and game masters who want all action pulp adventure ready to go out of the box, who aren't squeamish when it comes to descriptions of dead fascists. And so what they say it isn't for is an open-ended campaign where you explore the intricacies of your bespoke character arc.
Right. Exactly. Like I said, yeah. It does one thing.
To Brent's point, it does kind of one thing. Now, that's not to say that people haven't hacked this to some degree. There is a person out there that has put out kind of like their own thing called Revamped, which is, some one-shots, 6 new Fang members.
But I mean, it's still killing Mussolini. Like the goal is still kill fascists.
Yeah, it's still in a similar vein, just change a few things around. So but it's an interesting concept and everything.
What it really does really well is it does. Did you guys ever see the movie Sisu, which is
I did see Sisu,
where it's just him killing Nazis. Like it's like that. It's like an ultra-violent action movie where you play vampires that are just going to keep killing Nazis.
Yeah, it's kind of John Wick style.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of lulls.
Yeah, it's pinnacle action game. Like, and you can throw character stuff in there, but it's not 100% required.
Yeah, and truthfully, the game can be as much or as little as you want as you basically go between the start of the game and drinking Hitler's blood. And so I think we could talk a little bit about that, because I think that's the game mechanics themselves are probably pretty important to talk about, because it's a very simple game. It kind of is it's adjacent to the Powered by the Apocalypse. However, they have their own engine called the Havoc engine. Basically, as you roll dice, you're rolling a d6, and every time you roll a d6, you're looking for 4s, 5s, and 6s. 4 and 5s are successes, and 6s are considered criticals. And
well, you build
what you do.
The other thing that's important is you build a pool. It's like you start with a d6, and then you use items on your character sheet and stuff that's going on in the narrative to build a pool of dice.
Yep. Okay. And so you build a pool of dice, and that pool of dice can be very small, or it can be fairly large. We were rolling in some cases like 76, 86, and all that kind of stuff. And some of it is just like how you narratively use your equipment, because your equipment can be more appropriate in better situations. And so think of the stuff on your character sheet as kind of like prompts. And because it is a narrative game, kind of in the vein of Fate, where your goal is to kind of abuse your prompts in some ways, in my opinion.
It has a resource management. It has a resource management mechanic in it where your items have limited uses of your items, so there's like a resource
then you gotta throw them away and grab others.
And you gotta throw them away and kind of try and restock other things. So like your special cool stuff, like Cosgrave had mother somebody's stolen spirit jar, which had a 1 use on it, but it adds 3 dice to anything. So like I held on that to the whole game until the end because I didn't think it was worth spending.
No,
Yeah.
that was a good item.
Yeah, and it can be interesting because the idea about the equipment, and I think we could talk about that a little bit more, is that they want to promote using it because on your last usage you get an extra dice for
Mhm.
everything that isn't a one use item, I believe
You
is what it
actually,
said.
yeah, you double it
So
at
like,
the end. Yeah,
and so I think if it's a one use item, it just that's what you get. But
right.
if it's a multi use item, then you get multiple uses. We could talk about equipment a little bit more because I thought
Which
the
I think we
equipment was
forgot
pretty
every
cool.
time we did. Like I know I forgot it with
I
my.
remembered it once, and I gotta say, I really like playing with dice pool systems.
Mhm.
But there's something in my brain where it's like, well, I shouldn't try to abuse this too much. And then instead of rolling 5d6, I'm like, oh no, two seems legit. I should only roll two dice.
That seems like a
I, t-
lot of dice.
I
Yeah.
talk myself into just rolling two. But I did remember it. I think the last time I used the machine gun.
Yeah, I forgot it with my ghost jar that I had attacking the cyborg guy. Like I forgot at the last
Ubermensch.
turn that I used that. The last
We'll
time I
not
used that.
describe the enemies. We'll just call them either Ubermensch or elite enemies.
The
Very
Ubermensch
Sure.
were real because I almost died after
Elite bad guys.
one fateful sticking my head up above the stairs. I drew
yeah,
the fire though.
you did, you did. And so,
And
just to kind of finish that explanation about the dice pools, is that when you allocate your dice, you're usually allocating it to one of five types of scenarios. You're either advancing an objective, which as you try to do stuff in the game, you're basically moving on sites that have objectives. You're eliminating a threat. Threats come in the form of your various Nazi punching bags, Ubermensch, which are kind of elite units and
boss
stuff like that.
characters.
Bosses, basically, or mini bosses, mid
Mini
bosses.
boss,
Mini boss.
sure.
Defending yourself against attacks, basically creating, like once the threat attacks you, if they succeed, you have to kind of defend against it or else you get injured, like in Jeff's case. And injuries escalate fairly quick in the game. Like your first injury is like nothing, but then after that it's like boom, 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 pretty quick.
Well, it depends if you get
Feeding
it.
on
That mechanic kind of depends on if you get lucky or not. Like if you roll
Mhm.
the same spot more than once, it gets pretty dicey pretty quick.
Yeah, it can be pretty bad. Feeding on Nazi blood, basically drinking them, sucking out their souls, whatever you describe as doing that. And activating your specials, which you have special abilities which allow you to gain extra things. Like Flint could gain 3 blood instead of 2 if you activated a special. So I
Only
became
with a
kind of a blood
6.
But
bank.
yeah, you had to roll a six.
Yeah, so one thing to point out is so you roll your dice and then you allocate them how you want to the various different those options. Like you get blood, mitigate a threat, put it towards an
Mhm.
objective. And so you pick after. So the number of successes you get is important. And then if you roll a 6, that's when you can use one of your abilities. Like
Yeah, 6s are criticals, or you can use them to activate a special.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that's pretty, I mean, that's the mechanic though. I mean, that basic mechanic is how you navigate through the game, right? I mean, are there anything else that was there that was there anything I missed? Brent, I know you've kind of gone through this as well, but
No, I don't
just
think.
curious.
I think that's about it. I mean, that's the basic mechanics. Which before playing it, I thought sounded like the nebulous like threat
Mhm.
being just a thing, like kind of felt weird to me. Which is one reason why I hadn't run the game yet.
Mhm.
Um, but it makes more sense after we played it. So I'm glad we got a
Yeah.
chance to play it.
Well, then we also had the mechanic where if you defeat an Ubermenschen, you do get
In
a
advance.
boost in advance.
Mhm. Yep. And each character has 3 advances. And depending on your whoever's running it, some people interpret it you just have to defeat the Ubermenschen. Other people is you have to feed on the Ubermenschen. I guess I don't know. I was kind of curious about like how that went out there, and people, and they suggest describing it however narratively you feel is appropriate for the game. Um, so I think that talking about the rules and everything like that, this is where I most feel like from a role playing perspective, and like this is the most board gamey it felt. There aren't any pieces, obviously, but there is a map that basically divides Paris into 3 sectors.
Mhm.
And as you drop, you do your coffin drop into Paris, you start advancing through, through the various sectors, and you go to these different locations and everything like that. And it kind of felt that part can feel probably a little board gamey, because then you have to, because then you're like, oh, I go to this place, it has an objective of 6, and so I now have to whittle down, and now I just, and the role playing part comes in, how do you whittle that down through your dice pools? But I was curious as to your guys'
Well,
thought, because that
what I mean, the role playing part comes in how you interact with each other, like how
Yeah.
your characters kind of interact, and then they kind of interact with the environment, like what choices you make.
Mhm,
So I feel like that's very role play. The mechanics are just like they're just
mhm,
tactical mechanics, like, and that's the part that I kind of struggled with a bit, I guess, when I was reading the book to play it. Is yeah, it is kind of board gamey, and it is kind of abstract. It's an abstraction, like that's what the threat, the threat points and stuff are kind of an abstraction of, you beat goal A because you have racked up this many points towards the objective, or this many points
mhm,
towards the threat. But it's one of those games where it's like we talked about Lancer before, where it's like Lancers has a lot of combat stuff. Yeah, sure, you can roleplay if you want to, but this is kind of about being in giant robots and shooting each other. Like,
Yeah.
and it's that kind of thing. It's like, sure,
mhm,
Cosgrave could smoke a cigarette and talk about how Flint's a big dog, but that's really not what the game is. The focus of the game is like, we can
Right.
interact and make our characters whoever we want and solve problems however we want, but that's not what the game's about.
Yeah. I kind of get what you're saying, Mike, but I don't know if it feels any more board gamey to me than any other tactical combat. Like with, I take a 5 foot step. Now I'm flanking this guy. Now you get
mhm,
bonuses to attack him. I think some of that just comes from the tactical nature. I mean, I play a lot of board games. There's one right here. Um, our character sheets were kind of like some of the more complex,
Mhm.
fight 'em up kind of games, like character boards would be. So I
mhm.
I, I kind of get it. I didn't mind that because I didn't.
But I mean,
I,
from a tactical standpoint, it's less than some games because there
oh
isn't a
yeah,
5 foot step and stuff like that. It's very
yeah. We
narrative.
weren't on a grid or a
Yeah.
hex or,
Mhm.
I mean, it was an overall map that we had to get through because we had to get through Paris to get to the Eiffel Tower and connect that in some way.
I mean, it's very
So I don't know.
railroady. I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very railroady, again, the point of the game isn't to, well, we're going to explore London or we're going to explore Paris as these
Yeah.
vampires. That's not the point of the game. The point of the game is get from A to Hitler's blood.
We,
Like that's the point of the
we weren't
game.
supposed to hide in trench coats and hats like Scooby and Shaggy
Right.
at the outdoor cafe
I
sipping
mean,
wine and eating a baguette
I
while
mean,
the
you
Nazis
could.
ran past us.
But that's the point, is that there are probably Eat the Right games that could do that, because there is a stat called con, which is actually you're talking to Nazis
Right.
approach.
Well, there's a stealth
Yeah,
skill too.
And so sneaking past threats, conversing with Nazis and all that kind of stuff, or convincing people, that you're not the vampires are looking
Yeah,
for.
it's one of the. I guess that's the thing. What I would say about it's one of those games where all of the stats, basically, however you want to do it, they all go to the same thing. It's like, I want to sneak past them. Okay, roll your dice. Okay, what do you do? Well, I put one success towards sneakily killing a Nazi. I put one success towards the objective, and then I use one success to drink blood. Like, no matter how you say you're doing that, like it essentially
Mhm.
is all the same thing. It's all combat. The narrative is what really tells what you're doing,
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and that's either, that can either be a positive thing or a negative thing. Like sometimes when I look at those games, I go, well, why do they bother having 6 stats? Why don't they have 3 stats
Mhm.
and make one character good at each, or 2 characters good at each, one or the other? But it's to inspire the narrative. It's like if
Mhm.
Cosgrave, who wants is trying to talk the 2 Nazis in front of the gate out of defending the gate, like he can do that, but he's just as effective at it because it's essentially the same dice mechanic for everything.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I that is, and I put this out to people out there, is that like, if you played the game, like, what situations did your people use their you know their non best stat? Like, I think, for example, Flint's, like, his worst stat was shoot, I believe, because he was the brawl character. And so
Well, he also
so
doesn't
it's
have a
like,
gun at
well, he doesn't
all.
have a gun, but shoot is represented by killing Nazis at a distance. So throwing rocks, in my
Well, yeah.
opinion, would fall under that. Throwing throwing anything, right? You'd have to. So what would be? So what's? I'm not sure I understand the benefit of
I use
using one
shoot
of
quite a
your.
bit, and Astrid wasn't the best. I think I only had 2 dice for shoot.
Yeah, yours was in terror, but yours was in terrified.
Terror. Yeah,
She
I
was
needed
the
to. Yeah, I
terror.
needed to find a way that I was shooting a gun in a terrifying manner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that,
I
but
was
that's
doing something to
but
cripple
that's
her.
that is where
That's the
the
narrative part.
and that's where the cleverness comes in. Is what okay? My highest statistics is terrify. How am I being scary to meet this objective with my
Mhm.
machine gun? Like, how am I
Yeah.
doing using those two things together? Like
Mhm.
Cosgrave, I had to do a little bit more of like that thinking because he didn't have a 4 in anything. He had a
Mhm.
couple 3s and a couple 2s. And so there's a lot of like, well, I use the other stats the most. Like I think I used stealth a couple times. I used shoot. I didn't use melee at all. And I used a couple of those, and it's because and so like that's what the prompts. Think of more than prompts, more like prompts
Mhm.
than stats, like in D&D.
Mhm.
But again, that's where the question. That's like my question: why don't we all just have one stat? If I'm gonna try and focus on using my 4 all the time anyways, why don't everybody just have a
Yeah.
4? Like,
Why don't you
why
just
don't
have
you just
3
have
or
4
4
dice?
dice?
Yeah,
Yeah,
why don't you just have 4
as a
dice and then you have an
start.
item? But
Yeah. Well, and
it's
that.
more like it's more in a narrative prompt is the point.
Sure.
It's more like a narrative
Yeah.
prompt than like it's than D&D statistics.
Well, and so it's just a question out there to kind of like say,
No, it's a good
and
question.
we didn't and we did not experience a situation where it felt like we would rely on those really low stats to do a narrative thing because me using my brain, I was like, everything is a nail, I am a hammer, let's do this. I was able to brawl myself through a lot of
Well,
Nazis.
I did, and I had to compensate for my low shoot. Like I used guns almost the entire time, except for like the
Mhm.
very first. Well, both my melee and my shoot were 2s, so I picked the wrong character for the terrifying Astrid and the brawling Flint. There wasn't much chance of. Oh, I'm going to talk to them as Flint is bounding towards them and smashing their heads together.
Yeah,
Um,
like
I
we
prefer.
reconstituted, and I was like, I charged the truck.
yeah, exactly. So like Cosgrave was kind of like, oh, but when it did give me a chance to do is kind of be creative, like using the jar and stuff like that, like making sure I had items to compensate for my low shoot or my low melee.
Sure.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of cool. Like I had a lot
Yeah.
of fun playing as the weakest character in our little group.
Well,
Cosgrave was
weakest
a lot
based
of
I
on
fun.
our
just thought you
approach.
weren't. Cosgrave wasn't quite as straightforward. Like there was just
Correct.
different ways to take Cosgrave,
I
which was
mean,
kind of neat.
you guys had 4s and 1 stat apiece. I did not. So
Okay.
technically, I was the weakest
Okay,
character.
that's fair. That's
But
fair.
but I think it's interesting because it drives different narration and everything like
Hmm.
that. Like using the soul jar to the plan that you had with the soul jar, I thought was really an interesting thing, and how you decided to apply it to the Uber mission. We're not going to get into the details to kind of stay as spoiler free as possible, but that's a description that is very cool. Because you got to use the soul jar and you got to use the pass through walls
Hmm.
effect, so you got to narrate how this all goes, and it just adds flavor to it in that
Well, he's a
sense.
very magic-y character, and I tried to focus
Mhm.
on like, other than when he used the shotgun, he tried to do very magic-y things, and I tried to describe it as very magic-y.
Oh, if you don't know
So
how shotgun works, it probably feels kind of magical when you're on the receiving end.
It's probably true.
true, true. So I think we've been talking a lot about the characters and and we kind of moved away from the mechanics and gotten a little to the story a little bit, just kind of like the different players and everything like that. I think it is worth mentioning that in the and I only really want to talk about this because when we played Candela Obscura, I mean, we were a little bit like critical of how they told us this is how you should morally approach our game with scars and everything like that. Because I mean, sure, you can recommend it or you can provide best suggestions, but providing saying that those are how you play our game instead of just being like, okay, well, these are suggestions to be a better game master or be more appropriate. I felt that after reading the safety rules, is that they were like, yeah, this is what the game is. These are you know these safety rules are kind of in place. Like, for example, the safety rule about um, what was it? Um, oh gosh, I don't remember. I don't remember the one that stood out the most, but it was basically, like, Nazis are bad. They can never be morally complex characters.
Right. Like, yeah, the rule was like you don't play fascists.
Mhm.
Fascists are never good guys. Fascists in this game are bad guys. They're always bad guys. They can't be morally
Oh,
complex. They're
well,
just
the
bad
interesting
guys.
part is that I think I read, and I don't remember if this is exactly how it was phrased, but I remember it saying like the fascists are doing this because they chose to do this. They didn't get magically,
Right. Right. Yeah.
persuaded
Yeah.
because
You don't.
of
Yeah. You don't take
witchcraft
away
or culty.
choice. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
you
don't
didn't.
take away
Their
choice.
choice is they're doing this and they're bad people, which means that your choice of killing them as anti-hero vampires is okay.
Right.
Once.
It's action movie logic.
Mhm.
They're not people. they're
Yeah.
just things in this game. They're just an obstacle in this game, and that's where the abstraction comes from too. Is they're just an obstacle or a threat. They're not really a person.
Yeah.
And you have to keep that in mind. And if that makes you uncomfortable, this is not the type of game for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely not. No, it's definitely not for everyone. It's like a book, right? If
Mhm.
you pick up a book and it has a trigger warning, and you read the trigger warnings and you go, I don't like most of that stuff, you should probably not read the book. And in this case, you should probably not play this game.
These types of game reminds me of did either of you ever play Dynasty Warriors on any of the
Mhm.
consoles
I did,
where
yeah.
like you were a hero and you just swathed through like armies, just like
Hundreds,
you like swung your thing around, like just
yeah.
people just laid down. That's what these games are. This game is like it's very visceral.
Mhm.
I beat the bad guy. Like it's not much more complex than that.
Well, and they also try to not suggest that you be quote unquote good guys either. They don't want you to think that you're like, oh, we are really good people. Like you're bad vampires doing a good thing by accident.
Right.
That's
They're
really what
not
happens.
like your vampires really aren't heroes.
Mm-mm.
They're
No,
vampires. they're vampires.
And
no,
so they're
they
and
are weapons designed for a specific task, and you are accomplishing that one task.
Yeah, they're
and
weaponized blood
okay.
drinkers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point to bring about it is that they, there's many places where and I've seen this on subreddits, and I know we've had this discussion before. It's like, do you want to play an evil game or group? And I wouldn't necessarily consider this an evil group, but this is the group that you don't have to feel necessarily constrained by, like, oh, well, as part of the Geneva Convention, I need to take prisoners. Like,
Well, it's the age-old story trick of sure they're vampires and they drink blood, but they're not Nazis. like
exactly.
that's the age-old storytelling trick is
Mhm.
sure so and so kills a lot of people, but he's not a Nazi. Like
Yeah.
there's an ethical like and moral choice that was made, and they encourage they push that narrative.
Well, and it kind of brings back to that point. I think that was it Professor Dungeon Master was talking about it on one of his channels where he's like, the evolution of orcs through time
Mm-hmm.
is now
Yeah,
they're
orcs are
not.
a good example of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so like in the beginning, you kind of follow the very similar logic here, where it's like orcs were
Oh yeah, no,
barbarians. They
I've
were.
played games with orcs where it essentially felt like there was a kill on sight order anytime anybody saw an orc.
Mhm.
Like the group would engage them and fight to the death. And now orcs
Well,
are
like
super cool.
in Warhammer Fantasy and 40K, orcs are mushrooms, so they're distinctly not people. So they're
Mhm.
okay to slaughter in masses. In Tolkien, orcs were grown in or Orukai were grown in pods.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They aren't really people. They're constructs. So it's okay that Legolas shoots them with 50 arrows or whatever.
Mhm.
They don't so and that's and in this game the opposition is made in that sort of sense of don't think of them like people.
People.
Yeah.
Think of them as meat bags.
Right. Think of them as obstacles to be conquered and torn asunder.
That which is very interesting, and I like this touch when we played it, is that there always seemed to be a description of the type of blood that we were getting. Like subtle nuances, its
Mm-hmm.
aromas, its fragrance, it's mouth feel. It's how it felt on the palate. You know, kind of like you were at a fancy wine tasting. You're like, oh, it's a little bit bitter with a slight acidity, you know,
Oh, this is filled with amphetamines. Yeah.
and amphetamines.
Yeah.
So, what was the factoid you found out about the Germans? Brett?
Storm cigarettes, assault cigarettes. That was what it was. I looked up cigarette types that were in Germany at the time, and I can't remember. They were Stormen something, but they were assault cigarettes. That's what they were called. And I was like, that is the funniest thing I've ever read in my life.
Yeah. So I think just to wrap up on the safety rules and everything like that, they do really strongly suggest that you and your table have some candid conversations about what is appropriate, what's not, because this is a game where you could easily go overboard. You know, and having that kind of like, you know, put yourself on your baser side and describing how Nazis are getting ripped apart. You could easily like touch a nerve with somebody like related to, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we didn't really torture them or anything like that, but I'm sure some tables may feel that's cool to describe for their table.
Oh yeah, you
You
could
know,
it could easily get out of.
Oh yeah,
It
there's
could
a
easily get out of hand.
big window to go way over the top. Yeah.
mhm. So I don't normally, you know, as a group, we don't normally like need to talk about like lines, bails, and all that stuff because we have a fairly good grasp of where we are as players and how we play as a group. But you know, I would suggest that just at least have a check-in before you get into it, so somebody that you know likes stuff movies a little bit too much doesn't enact their fantasy on the the
Yeah.
entire rest of the group, and everyone just kind of walks away from that being like, is that who Brent really is? Like,
Well, I will say one thing. It's always like there's that World War II like miniatures game where it's
mhm.
like everybody picks a side, and then you always worry that one of your friends is going to be like, "I'll play the Germans." Like that's that sort of thing where it's like, "Oh, I know way too much about. I don't know if we can hang out anymore. You seem much too excited about that." So it's the
you,
same sort
you
of
seem to
thing.
know a lot about Germans.
Yeah, it's the
Hmm.
same sort of thing where it's like, "Oh, yeah, we'll torture this guy." Have you read a lot about this? I'm uncomfortable now.
Oh, I just went to a torture museum one time when I was in Amsterdam. It was really fun.
Well,
Yeah.
let's be honest. If you watch any show about the CIA or any like
Well,
if you've
there you
watched
go. Yeah.
Homeland, right, on Showtime,
Hmm.
which is a really good show, but there's about 1,200 people that get waterboarded in there. Like it
Hmm.
Which I've heard is
because
unpleasant.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, I've heard the same thing, right? So and unfortunately, it's really easy to accomplish with a minimal of equipment.
Exactly. That's why
No,
it's
as
in
much fun
use.
as I had playing this game, and I had a lot of fun playing it. Again, it is not for everyone, and you should sit down and talk with your group, you know, about what's acceptable for everyone, because there's probably things that could happen in this game that would, you know, put somebody off of a group to the point where they may not come back
Right.
Hmm. If you're not careful. So
if you're not careful, right? Be considerate of the people you're playing with.
yeah. So in summary, Eat the Reich. It is a game slash adventure, kind of all baked into one. You have a singular objective that you're always going to play. However, that objective could be varying depending on how you play or who you play with and all that stuff. So there is some replayability to it. I mean, because it's not like your objective is hidden. Like you gotta get to Hitler. Is not like, oh, this time we're gotta get to Hitler. Oh, surprise! It's
Oh,
a
this time we're doing something different.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely it's like how much do you enjoy playing with that context? So it might feel like a single use play with your table. You know, you might just pull it out once and play it, if at all. You know, some players probably just have it for a coffee table kind of thing. But I feel like if you're okay with doing the ultra violence, you're cool with making sure that your table is respectful of each other's boundaries and stuff like that. With going that route, it's a hell of an experience. I
Uh,
think it's a good game.
and I think it has a little bit of replayability if you don't do the like us. We didn't have time, so we didn't do the
Mhm.
whole map, and we didn't do some of the reinforcement rules. But I think there's a replayability there in playing a different character, going a different direction, like choosing
Mhm.
where you go on the map, and it's limited. But I think there is some replayability there,
Well, yeah,
which I think
Yeah.
which is kind of cool because I've never had a game like that where I like I've never had a one shot where I felt like I could play it again with the same people because it's very story driven, whereas this is very game driven. And I think
Well,
there's some replayability to it. It's a lot like a video game. Like you could
there were
easily
three. Oh, sorry, Brent.
you could easily make this a video game, I think, which would be cool as hell. But anyways, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, there were 3 levels, right? And each level had 4 areas that you could explore, and you were expected to explore 1 to 2 before you moved on to the next one.
Yeah, that was at
So
least the advice
you're
we
not
got.
exploring like necessarily the whole map every time. So there's definitely some replayability, and different groups are going to approach things a little bit differently. Different mixes of characters, I think, are going to be a little different. I mean, this is definitely a game at, I hate to say this, but late night at a convention, somebody's like, "Hey, man, somebody's starting up an Eat the Right game. You want to get in on this?"
Yeah, I agree.
I'd probably go,
Yeah.
"Yeah." Let me
Well, yeah. Well, and I mean, you
let
could
me get
even
some
make this a
water.
yearly. You could make this a yearly play, and you would probably get a few years out of it before you were like,
Yeah.
okay, I think we can pass this year.
Well, yeah,
Because
and it's what, it's a $30 book ish if you can find it in print.
Yeah,
I don't
something
know.
like that.
Yeah. Well, however much it costs. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
It's a beautiful book. It's right up here.
It is.
Mhm.
No, the art is gorgeous.
The art is super cool. Yeah, the art is way super cool.
I don't think and if anybody's looking for like complaints about the game, I don't really have any complaints. Like I said, it does a little board gaming, a little bit of player agency is kind of limited because your objective is pretty limited. But outside of that, I don't really. I think it was a hell of a good time. So I don't. Do you guys have any things that you were like, ooh, I wouldn't recommend this because of?
We played for 4 hours, and when we got done, I felt like we'd played for about half that.
Yeah,
So
it was very.
I was pretty engrossed,
Mhm.
and in the moment, I thought, which for me is a sign of a really good game.
Getting that
It's a
Yeah,
good
flow
game for
state.
me.
I agree. It was no, it was really. It's the way that the game is constructed, having one goal and like being like encouraged to just move. Like it makes the
Mhm.
game very quick, and
Yeah.
there wasn't. You didn't have much downtime, so you didn't have much time like think about it. And we played for quite a
Mhm.
while. And yeah, it felt quick. It was a lot of fun. It's a fun game.
Oh, and people that are planning for this, unless you want to rush through it, kind of like we did, plan for 2 to 3 sessions. Unless you're like basically sitting down all day at a local library for 10 hours straight, which would be a hell of a day. But I think that the one thing I heard was that about a 10-hour like would be a long play.
Yeah.
And I think that's similar to something else that we had. What other game did we sit down and play that was like 10 hours was supposed to be about the right time? Do you remember?
Mm-mm.
That's weird.
There
That's
was an
funny
adventure.
because
It wasn't a game. It was a one shot that you were running, and I don't remember which system it was.
I don't remember which one was either. I just remember now that I said that I remember reading that in the other one. It was like planned for,
Yeah, this should take about this much time. Yeah.
which is weird to me, but whatever.
I don't mind the time limits, but some groups are going to go a little faster, and some groups are going to go
Mhm.
way longer. And a lot of times, we fall into that way longer camp. I think.
Well, we like role playing, which means we talk a lot. So in character and out of character, which is good. Those are the type of games that I like. But those will elongate a game.
Yeah,
You're right.
you could easily get 20 hours with our group out.
Probably.
6-month Eat the Reich adventure as we slowly stalk through Paris to
Yeah.
And
do our
people are
final
like, "Yeah,
quest.
man, we did that one night. We met at 4. We stopped at 2 in the morning. It was
Yeah,
great."
that's
We
true.
meticulously scoured Paris free of every fascist we could find.
Yeah. So, there it is. Eat the Reich. We had a hell of a good time. Thanks go out, for having us that run for us as a group. We all 3 got to play together. So super cool that we had that opportunity to do so. And we are looking forward to hearing from everybody your stories about playing the game. It's not a new game by any means. It's been out for a year now.
About a year, and it funded.
So
It funded the beginning last year and came out last year, like the end of last year. But there has been an uptick in people playing it. I've noticed there's been an uptick of
Oh, really?
of actual plays of it on YouTube recently. So
Good.
Well,
It deserves it.
couldn't possibly know why. Okay. So with that, anybody have Jeff, if you want to let people know how they can talk to us outside of the comment section, do you want to throw that out there?
Yeah, you can look for @Rollwise. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, Threads. You can email Mike at rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can find us anywhere. And thank you for joining us. I hope you have some vampire adventures. And as always, roll well, roll wise, be safe out there, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks.